Hello everybody, my name is Danny McCoy, I'm the CEO of Ibec, and you're very welcome to the European Parliament, where Ibec are in the process of a delayed St. Patrick's Day event here, but we're joined this afternoon by Seán Kelly, MEP, and by Minister of State Thomas Byrne, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs. As I said, it's a time where we're meeting under great uncertainty and great tragedy with the war in Ukraine, which is obviously filling all of our thoughts and concerns. There's many things, however, going on as well in the world, from the inflationary spike to still dealing with the pandemic. The European Parliament and the European Commission have a huge job of work at the moment, as well as the Council. And so business and that interaction between business and politics, I think, has never been greater in its purpose. So part of our interaction here in Brussels, as we did last week in the United States, is really to get across that idea of the business model capable of addressing many of these challenges, because we want a sustainable model of substance, and that's the nature of the Ibec campaign, which I'm sure we'll get to talk about a little later on. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Seán maybe to give us a little bit of an introduction, and then I'll talk to Thomas, who'll join us for the first 15 minutes. Then we'll all be joined by the President of the European Parliament, and after that, Mairead McGuinness, the Commissioner, will join us then. So, Seán, over to you.
Good Danny, Ibec, August Aristod, Tomás, agus Corda, Fáilteoibh go dtí Parliament ní Hórpa, go dtí an ócáid Fiortanmhach seo, mar a bhfuil míad ceiliúradh lála pádraig ortha ag árgáda ó Ibec a rís imlína. Agus tá saring gur féidirling an ócáid seo bheagaing lína a rís imlína, agus beidir an bhíl se cóing beidir go mé míad an seo gach duine le chéile. Ach fi láthair, raibh míad a raig, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all and to host this lovely occasion on behalf of Ibec, who have organised this in the European Parliament now for a good number of years. It's always a huge social occasion, but unfortunately this year we're restricted because of COVID, but that's coming to an end, so we look forward maybe to next year being here in person. But we have a great line-up, as Danny said, and now I will hand back to Danny so he can introduce our first speaker, and I thank him very much for coming, Minister of State Byrne.
Yeah, Thomas, and thanks very much, Seán. Thomas, you're in town with the General Council. What was the discussions today? Clearly, Ukraine, I'm sure, top of the list.
All eyes are on the European Council this week, so I suppose our meeting is to prepare for the European Council, and obviously Ukraine is the biggest issue there. I think the one thing we get across from all member states is unity. Everybody wants to be on the same page. Yes, there are differences of emphasis and nuance, of course, on every issue, but generally speaking, the European Union is speaking with one voice really on Ukrainian issues. So I think there's a determination to ensure that the sanctions that are there work. There's a determination to do as much as we possibly can for Ukraine, but also a determination as well to make sure that the impact on consumers in the European Union is mitigated to the greatest extent possible. And that's very difficult, with energy prices rising particularly, but also other prices will rise as a result. So that's going to be a focus for discussion this week as well at the European Council. We also got time as well today for a short discussion on Brexit, but it's clearly not the big issue this week, but it's always very important for us to be there when that discussion is taking place and to make sure our point of view is put across.
I think that's a good point about Brexit as well. I mean, we will talk about Ukraine and the inflationary cycle, but very conscious in the last week, particularly in the States, about the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement coming up next year. You know, I think we all know the lack of peace, tragically, as we see in Russia invading Ukraine, is we can't take that peace process for granted. And so Brexit obviously is a destabiliser.
Yeah, and the truth is the European Union has been the greatest peace process ever. So when John Hume was in the European Parliament, he was inspired by the peace between France and Germany, inspiring the Northern Ireland peace process. So I think all around the place, people want to be at peace, they want to be trading, cooperating, doing business, and making sure people can live a good, prosperous life. That's what the European Union is about. That's what Ukraine wants, I think. And I think we need to do everything we can this week to ensure that we give as much leadership as a European Union, and we're going to do that together, particularly with Joe Biden as well, who'll be at the European Council this week. And again, that's a really important signal. The links between Europe and America, I think, are obviously very strong, but there's huge potential there. And I know that last week in the States, Maris Sefcovic was there as well as the European Commission Vice President, engaging with individuals and politicians in America on protocol issues as well as European Union issues. And I think that's really important because Ireland isn't just part of the European Union, we are the European Union, and we're all in there together.
And can I just ask you two questions, Thomas? One is, and I agree completely. It's fantastic to see the unity that's in the whole Western world against Putin's war in Ukraine. But is there a danger that that unity would dissipate if the war goes on for a long time? And the second question is, what is the actual expectation of the effect of the sanctions? How do they bite and hurt Putin so that he actually might stop the war?
Well, I think, look, we'll always be tested by unity. So, I mean, I think people didn't expect it this time. It happened, and we're going to have to work to make sure it continues. But what I'd say about this is democracy. Democracy is complicated. It's not one person sitting there making all the decisions. It's a European Parliament here of hundreds of members working together with member states to make European laws. That's tricky, that's difficult, let alone 27 leaders around the table. But there is determination to show that unity, because that's a huge strength for us. Because, look, as a European Union, we're not going to war. It's not a military alliance. So we've got to stay united and then take whatever action we can. That's what the sanctions, I think, are about, is to ensure that we squeeze Putin, but also the Russian economy as well, to the greatest extent possible. And they need to know that if they want to get out of these sanctions, which are pretty devastating for their economy, they're going to have to withdraw, end this war, and probably do a whole lot more in terms of rebuilding as well. So that's the strongest weapon we have as a European Union. We're not, you know, and that's the difficulty. Like we're a democracy. We do things right. We look after people's human rights. We protect minorities, all that type of thing. Putin doesn't do that, and you're not on a level playing pitch really then. So all we can do is the non-military things, I suppose.
No, I agree completely, and that's one of the annoying things of critics of the EU, some people blaming the EU for the war, when the EU, as Danny knows well, is a peace project about building prosperity and growing jobs, etc., and giving opportunities for Irish businesses across Europe to work together and to grow. And yet you have some critics will say that the EU was responsible for the war. It's maddening.
Well, you only have to ask our Eastern European colleagues, quite a part of the EU, and even, if I may say as well, NATO, that they want the freedom, the democracy that we have in the European Union. That's what they want. That's why they want to be part of the EU. And that's why Ukraine wants to be in it as well. And it's a very, very good contrast between Ukraine and Russia and what their governments want for their people.
One of the things that's, and that's a good question on what, you know, what's the role of the sanctions. If you look at what governments are doing and collectively coordinate it, separately, society is moving on a little bit faster in the kind of the cancelling culture of withdrawing business from Russia, somewhat arbitrary. You can see why the emotion is right and so on, but again, the long-term consequences are not known. This is this ESG agenda that people have been talking about in business, the environment, social, governance. And it's clear now the S is actually the biggest part of this. You know, we can see that the environmental push we had last year will require mediation during this high inflation. You know, there's pressure to slow down or to introduce different energy sources. That coordination between society and governments is probably something we're experiencing now for the first time, where it's not necessarily aligned.
Yeah, look, I think it's good. I think people are having their voice heard. I think what Russia is doing, I think, deserves the very worst possible punishment that we can give. We don't want to obviously hurt ourselves too much in the process, but we probably will get hurt, quite frankly. Governments as well have to be very cautious too, that they're not sort of running on a emotion of the hour or emotion of the day, and take decisions in a delicate situation like this very, very carefully. I mean, look, Ireland doesn't have to make decisions about, for example, no-fly zones or all those types of things, but any governments that are involved in those considerations have to be very, very careful that you don't get caught up in a crest of a wave, and that you don't consider the consequences very, very carefully. So again, that's one of the advantages of democracy, that people have to consider these things. There has to be compromise. We have to work together. There's 27 leaders around the table. Whatever they decide, we'll have to get through the Parliament probably, and through the member states again. So that leaves a bit of time for deliberation, but then it causes distress then that we're not moving fast enough or whatever. But no, I think society and governments are working well together, but I think government is there at times just to make sure that we do things very, very carefully.
No, Danny. And just a question. Did the Council discuss today what is being often mentioned we should do straight away, and that is reduce immediately dependency on Russian coal and gas and oil? How far can we go, as you said, without hurting ourselves too much? And where would, again, we draw the line?
Well, obviously, the Commissioner drawing up, you know, proposals on this. The leaders gave them the mandate at Versailles. That will continue. There'll be another paper published now in the next while about this. From the Irish government's point of view, we're very, very clear that we have to go forward on the renewable agenda. for environmental reasons, but also for energy security reasons as well. And that's more urgent than ever. So we're going to be working towards that. Fit for 55 is we support. We're going to work with it and get it into place. But undoubtedly for us, the renewable energy agenda is where we need to be, not just for the environment, but to reduce prices as well, and to get rid of that kind of uncertainty on prices or dependence on autocrats like Putin or wherever else we have to go looking for the product.
I think the campaign that Ibec have launched in the last couple of months is called the Model of Sustainable Substance. We talked about the Irish economy having substance over the last number of years. We've seen that in the spectacular growth rates, and that employment is at its highest level ever. Lots of opportunity, an opportunity to give the resources for the humanitarian response we're seeing from Irish people, which is to be commended. The sustainability, I think a lot of people narrowly define it as got to do with the environment. But I think what's really been demonstrated is our societies need to be underpinned sustainably as well. And so it's refreshing that we've seen that kind of collective response to a tragedy. We saw it in tragedy with the pandemic as well, is that it really should imbue us with a confidence of working together, business and politics, to actually make people's lives better.
And the European Union has taken a lead there, I think, that, I'm grateful for, on COVID, on the economy post-COVID, and now in Ukraine, where we've worked together in circumstances where you wouldn't predict that we'd be able to work together. At the start of the pandemic, it looked pretty shaky for the EU. The economic side, the same. Ukraine, potentially. It's not been the case. So I think people can have confidence that we have a system of government in our country, in Ireland, and in the European Union that's complicated, doesn't always give us the answers we want immediately on the day, but overall looks out for the best possible interests of citizens.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge of the concurrent problems we have is with hope that we'll see the Ukraine situation stabilise and the Russia withdraw. That the pandemic is coming hopefully towards endemic phase. But the problem is that we'll definitely be dealing with the next couple of years inflation, because it does appear to be a genie that's got out of the bottle. And I think that's one of the challenges for us as both businesses in terms of making sure that our societies and business stay competitive, but also the erosion and the inequalities that can occur in an inflationary periods, because depending, you could be on the right side. You can be on the right side of history in many ways, but you can certainly be on the right side of an inflationary spike as well. And that can really undermine our societies. And I think business is certainly struck by that moment to try to make that kind of coordination. Thomas, I know you're going to have to leave us. Do you want to say any final words? Seán, staying on.
No, just to wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day. It's been obviously tinged by Ukraine this year. So we haven't been, as a government, sort of celebrating St. Patrick's Day, but really using it as a moment to show what Ireland is. It's a democracy, part of the world order. And that's what we want. That's what Ukraine wants for itself and what we want for Ukraine. And we'll continue to support the people of Ukraine, particularly refugees coming in, but also in terms of financial support as well through various instruments. That will happen, and they can be sure that our voice, such as it is, will be very strong here in Brussels, but also in the United Nations as well. And on that note, I might pay tribute to our ambassador, Deputy Perm Rep Jim Kelly, who died last week very suddenly. He spoke very strongly and eloquently on the situation in Ukraine, with our ambassador Geraldine Byrne there as well. So may he rest in peace.
Indeed, and that's a nice point to make for Jim Kelly. His sad passing. Thomas, thank you for joining us. We're going to have a message now from the President of the European Parliament. So Roberta Metsola is the President, and so we're going to run that clip now. Thank you.
Dear Commissioner, dear Mairead, dear Minister, colleagues, friends, what a pleasure it is for me to speak to you on this special occasion, St. Patrick's Day. Ireland is possibly the only country in the world that has successfully managed to turn its National Day into a joyful international celebration of fun and music, Crack Agus Ceol. Many thanks to Ibec, to you, Seán, and to your team that managed to secure fresh green shamrocks for my lapel today so that I too may be one of yours. Unfortunately, this year we are not rejoicing as we had hoped. Today we pay tribute to horrendous suffering and death endured by fellow Europeans in an ongoing conflict in Ukraine. And my thoughts are with the family of journalist from Ireland, Pierre Zakrzewski, who was killed in the last days. Pulling out from the COVID pandemic, we had hoped to focus foremost on rebuilding our economy. But today, beyond gathering strength for recovery, we show solidarity with the people of Ukraine. we rally to provide shelter and humanitarian aid to over 2.8 million Ukrainians who have been forced to flee their homes to find safety with us in the European Union. Today, we stand with Ukraine. We stand with Ukrainian people that had hoped to focus on working, studying and raising children, but instead face war. In this respect, let us applaud the Irish government for the support it has provided to the Ukrainian Health Service, with donations of medical supplies under a coordinated EU response. Let us praise the over 9,000 Irish homes that have signed up to welcome refugees in an immediate response of generosity and solidarity. St. Patrick, upon landing in Ireland during the 5th century, is said to have chased all the snakes out of Ireland. That may scientifically be questioned. But what is not in doubt is that he came to teach warmongers to lead a peaceful way of life. Let us reflect on the importance of his message of peace, a message that is relevant to all, but most particularly to Ireland, a state committed to military neutrality. In recent weeks, since the return of war to our continent, the European Union has shown remarkable unity and resolve in addressing an aggressive attack. The actions that we have led, massive economic sanctions, aid, the welcoming of refugees, we have done them not for ourselves, not out of conceit for our European Union project. We have done them because we stand united for peace and for our values of democracy. This year marks 50 years since Ireland joined what was then called the European Economic Community, the EEC. And today still, the support of Irish citizens for the European project remains among the highest across the European Union. 20 years ago, Ireland enthusiastically adopted the euro from the onset. And last month, the Irish Times reported on a surge in demand for Erasmus places among Irish students. I am proud that Irish enthusiasm for Europe lives on. We often hear about the positive impact that the European single market has had in helping Ireland's economy become highly competitive. And we can salute Ibec for its role over the years to help Ireland's integration into the heart of Europe's business ecosystem. But Ireland has also given a lot back to Europe. There have been economic and societal benefits both ways. Ireland will receive next generation EU recovery funds while also being a net contributor to the EU budget and having a central role to play in addressing challenges ahead, all the more so since the departure of the UK from the EU. Ireland has offered great people to Europe. An Irish diaspora is spread across European cities associated with leading business sectors such as food and drink, digital and technology, pharmaceuticals and medical devices, as well as in financial and retail services. Our European institutions have also benefited immensely from Irish human capital. I think of my predecessor, Pat Cox, who since his time as President of the European Parliament has continued to fight for democratic elections and for fair trials, in particular in Ukraine, where he led crucial democracy support missions with like-minded Europeans. We think of people like Catherine Day, Peter Sutherland, David O'Sullivan, Emily O'Reilly, John Hume, and many more exemplary Irish people that have done and continue to do both Ireland and Europe proud in their commitment to making our Europe a better place. At this point, let me salute those of you in attendance of this digital event today. With International Women's Day just behind, I was pleased to hear that Ireland has a new public holiday on St. Bridget's Day. Henceforth, St. Bridget, who became famous for her kindness and care, will be celebrated on par with St. Patrick. Ireland will have a national holiday in recognition of the work and care of volunteers and frontline workers, frequently women, in times of crisis. And I'm glad to see that Ireland takes gender balance seriously. So well done, Bridget, well done, Patrick, and thank you, Ireland, for the generosity and solidarity that you show Europe.
Great. Thank you very much to President Metsola for giving us that address. And now we're joined by our good friend, Mairead McGuinness, Commissioner for Financial stability, financial services and the Capital Markets Union. Mairead, thank you for joining us.
No, pleasure to be here, and lovely to be here with Seán, my colleague, my former colleague here in the Parliament. And I suppose I want to just refer, if I may, I don't claim sainthood, but my middle name is Bridget. So I'm really pleased about the holiday for St. Bridget's Day. I'm really pleased too that we're marking what is a happy occasion, St. Patrick's Day, the role of the Irish, Europe and some wider issues. But I know you've already talked about the Ukraine, but I can't really but open my remarks by reflecting on what's happening on the ground in Ukraine, to the people, the men who stay to fight and the women and children who flee for their lives. And what has been extraordinary, to the great credit of the neighbouring countries, the neighbouring member states have been incredible in trying to give comfort to those women and children who have had to flee their homes. What I really worry about is that this has happened, first of all, and that we have no real idea as to how this will end or when it will end. And, you know, we've had Brexit, we've had COVID, and now we have a war. And it's a huge wake-up call to us all that this has happened. And indeed, there will be analysis, I'm sure, in time to come as to how and why. But I do think it's important for us to stand shoulder to shoulder. And again, the solidarity and the unity of the EU27 is absolutely vital to get us through this crisis. We were expecting a recovery from COVID, and I know now that recovery will be different. We see what's happening with energy prices. We see what's the threats of global food insecurity because of this crisis. And I think more than ever, we know the interconnectedness of us all. So Ireland, a small member state, connected with Europe, connected to the wider world, and that we are all impacted by these very big events, life-threatening for so many. And I really feel for the people on the ground here. So my work on financial services will impact, I hope, and help some of our friends from the Ukraine, because under our legislation, which they are now covered by, when they come into Europe, they are entitled to open a basic bank account, to have access to cash. And we're working hard with all of the authorities in the neighbouring member states to make sure that this message gets through. We're also looking at questions of financial stability. So you know that we've worked on 4 packages of sanctions to make sure that we hit the Russian war machine. It's had a big impact, each of these packages, on the economy in Russia. The currency is collapsing. There's all sorts of financial consequences as we, impacted the central bank there. And of course, people are saying, well, what else is there to do? My priority as Commissioner is to make sure we implement fully the sanctions packages that are now on the table. And we have a duty not only to prepare the legislation, but make sure that it's implemented. Member States really keen to do everything right. Companies are also very keen that they do everything right. What's very interesting is that those companies not impacted by our sanctions are deciding themselves to withdraw their investments and their presence in Russia. So there are cascading consequences for what Putin has done. And in one sense, I feel sorry for Russian citizens who are not part of this, but are obviously involved in it. Our reliance on energy, and I'm sure Seán Kelly, who is an expert on energy here in the Parliament, on Russian gas and oil, is really unsustainable. It was before this, but it now is particularly not sustainable. The Commission have come forward with efforts to try and plan for us to move away from that reliance quickly. Storage, other supply sources, ramping up the investments in renewables. I think our taxonomy and the work we're doing on sustainable finance will help all of that. But it's important for us also to be humble and to realise that we are very vulnerable, that our business community that have suffered hugely with COVID and are fighting back are vulnerable now on the energy side. And I suppose because of my background in agriculture and food, both in this House and indeed now as I contribute to the college, global food insecurity can cause massive political and social issues in countries that are food deficient today. And we're seeing that already. We see that wheat is the staple of so many countries, and that Ukraine and indeed Russia were part of that supply chain. I've had horrible videos sent to me on my phone because I've somebody I know who was in Ukraine, and they're shelling and bombing the farmyards, the grain stores, the equipment, so that farmers who want to plant, because farmers want to grow, cannot. And we have to be mindful of all of these things. So I suppose tough times demand strong people and strong leadership. And my last comment, if I may, is to say thank you, Danny, and your organisation for your constant engagement with us. And we are really, really happy about that. And I'm sure Seán has reflected that. And lastly, the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, very crucial during the worst days of COVID. Really crucial in these difficult days of this war. And I have to say, from a gender point of view, with the Bridget name looming, I'm very proud to be part of a gender-balanced European Commission and really happy to be here. I feel guilty. I don't have anything green on, but I should have thought about it, so apologies. But the men have, turned out very well, and I'm very pleased to see that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mairead. And we, in Ibec, we're bringing forward a campaign on a model of sustainable substance, and that whole ESG agenda we were talking about earlier on is that sustainability is not just about the environmental, it's about the governance, it's also though about society and particularly the peace. And one of the issues, of course, we referred to was the peace process in Ireland, and making sure that we underpin that given all the challenges that we're experiencing now and with Brexit and the moving parts there, so with the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement next year, the business community certainly sees by that sustainability argument as well for our society. But maybe on the environmental one, Seán, just on, given that energy is very much top of mind now in terms of the cost, the inflation, but also security of supply. The Fit for 55 package and the energy components of that, we can't lose sight of that agenda either here and the sustainability. Do you like to maybe give some observations where we are?
No, you're absolutely right, Danny, and Mairead, Bridget, good to see you. When this mandate started, the two big agenda items were the digital agenda and the climate change agenda. Now, as Mairead said, COVID and Ukraine have taken over in terms of publicity, but these are still key matters for making progress in terms of sustainability for society, as you have pointed out. And particularly, they can be used as opportunities to actually bring forward the deployment of renewables in so many different ways and reducing emissions. For instance, in the energy performance of buildings, which I'm a rapporteur for, there's a huge opportunity there to not just retrofit public buildings, which must be done, but also private buildings. And I'm delighted to see the Irish government in particular taking this seriously and launching campaigns and schemes to give 80% grants for insulation, and also, of course, trying to help in the whole area of renewable energy, whereby consumers can become prosumers. And that's hugely important because that will help, again, feed into the whole narrative of reducing dependency on foreign imported fossil fuels. And I think that's hugely important. Even in relation to agriculture, again, the CAP is built around essentially now the key aspects of the whole eco schemes, and again, looking at carbon farming, trying to maintain the biodiversity, all very important aspects. But again, there are opportunities for farmers to create their own renewable energy, particularly in sheds where they could have solar panels. You have the whole development now, I think, and I'm glad to see we are beginning to wake up to it, of anaerobic digestion. All that is going to be very important. But it's all underpinned, as you said, by the Fit for 55. That has to be achieved. So we have to put the measures in place to deal with it, to make it happen, and to put the supports behind it. And I think there is an understanding at all governments now within the European Union that this is something we cannot renege on. And looking at the crisis, especially the invasion of Ukraine, it's actually an opportunity for us to speed up the deployment of renewables, to speed up retrofitting. But of course, an awful lot of work has to be done. And your own members will be very crucial to this because you will need well-qualified builders. You'll need people with the skills coming through the second and third level institutions, etc. And you'll also need the raw materials. So there is no time to waste, but I think the momentum is gathering again, and I'm encouraged by that.
That's a good bridge to, you'll also need the finance and the financial literacy to know it's worth doing.
Yeah, I mean, what Seán says there is really crucial, particularly the point where we're not derailed from our objectives. So the climate targets, the whole Green Deal is still there, despite everything else, and it's more urgent. The finance piece is really, really important, and we call this sustainable finance, but it's money for the right purposes is how I would describe it. We've been engaged in a lot of, I suppose, pieces of legislation to try and point both the financial world and the corporate world generally towards sustainability, so criteria and taxonomy, all of these detailed things. But essentially, the more we see transparency in the financial system as to what it is doing to fund sustainability, and corporates, what their plans are, the more we will achieve. I think there will be concerns about the price of raw materials now. I think there's no point in us saying that everything is easy. If anything, we are more challenged than ever. And that what our expectations were coming out of COVID before the war are very different today, the realities we deal with. So in some senses, I suppose it goes back to this point that we have to prioritise, and we have to make sure that everything we do is effective towards achieving these goals. I mean, for your business communities, large and small, I mean, this environment is extremely challenging for them, both in terms of potential interest rate issues, inflation. We could have now stagflation, which is the bigger worry now because of the war. So I think it's important also in our communications with people, you know, when I was here as a Member of Parliament, as Seán does regularly, just to talk to people, not in a way that alarms, but also in a way that informs, and not try and hide that these are difficult transitions, but we can do it. And if Europe can't do it, who else can? I mean, that's the truth of it. Maybe another point to say, I know that your companies, many of them operate globally. So they talk to me about, wouldn't it be better to have global standards around sustainability or around corporate governance? And yes, that is true. So we try and work globally to make sure that there is at least a common standard. We're not going to get entire global agreement on everything, but we can work for common standards. Just come from meetings today, for example, with the insurance sector, its role in providing long-term investments. The way we're reviewing Solvency II legislation is to do that. We're talking, of course, the whole financial system to make sure that they're orientated towards sustainability. But, of course, the financial system itself is vulnerable to climate and biodiversity. And therefore, they have to make sure that they do work internally. So, I mean, you don't even hit the ground running here. You hit the ground like really going fast, and you have to stay standing. And I suppose if I were in business today, I would be concerned about what faces us all. But I would also say that we have to stay the course. We're taking some pain because of our sanctions in Russia. It's right that we do. And I think if we didn't, we would be found wanting, but we're doing the right thing. And therefore, we have to see how can we sustain this. Are there sectors of our economy and society that need particular support, and how will we do that? So tomorrow, without breaking any confidence in our college meeting, we will be focusing more on energy and on food security, and our leaders meet later this week. So, I mean, it is a little bit of a roller coaster time, but we have the luxury here in this house of democracy to debate and talk to one another and come to solutions. You know, our friends in the Ukraine, they enjoyed that too. And it's been taken away from them. I think that's the thing that I find very difficult emotionally to deal with, that, you know, something as valuable as freedom is being robbed from them, and their cities are being plundered and destroyed, and people are being murdered in their apartments, in their hospitals, in their homes. I mean, the sad part, and I wrote down, because I loved the reflections of President Metsola around John Hume and peace. And I mean, what would John Hume think of what's happening in Europe today, given that he really worked so hard to bring people together? And we will have to work very hard to bring divided societies together whenever this passes. And I mean, that's a challenge for a generation of politicians.
I think when you look at the ESG components, you know, Seán picked up on the E there. Yeah. We talked earlier on that latter part about society itself can be unsustainable if we don't protect it. And the governance issue. So the corporate sustainability, you've got, You know, two directives there. One's on reporting, the other on due diligence.
Yeah, and I suppose sometimes people think, why have two? They are different instruments. One is reporting, the other is to try and get behavioural change so that in the boards of companies, which we hope will be gender balanced, that we will have an awareness of the need to look beyond just profit and loss. That there are issues where you have to make investment decisions based on more than return on investment, and including that you can, I suppose, stand up and say we did the right thing. And already, I know I've spoken to some Irish companies, they know that this is coming and they're already changing behaviour in a way towards making sure that companies they deal with in their supply chains don't cause problems for them. I mean, I've said many times that I regard this path towards sustainability and the whole corporate governance as a bit like what the Irish government asked our businesses to do when Brexit happened. So it basically said, you need to look at your supply chain end to end and back again. Look for the Brexit vulnerabilities and tackle them. Equally on sustainability, and I say it at home on our own farm, where are we vulnerable in their supply chain? The livestock feed, the seed, the fertiliser, where's the vulnerabilities? What can we do as individual companies or entities to change our supply chain to make sure that we are sustainable in the long term? So it's not exactly a difficult process, but finding solutions are very difficult. And that's why the legislation is needed, because it gives clarity and certainty, even if it causes, in some cases, a need for additional reporting. And I'm conscious of that too, and I'm sure that's something you'll raise with me, that we don't want to overburden. So people have said to me, maybe you should drop some of this red tape. And I said, well, we need green tape then. Call it whatever colour you like. But companies need certainty about what they have to report, and the financial system and investors need information so that they can invest in a sustainable way. And I hope that we can work together. I mean, we have to work with Parliament and Council to make sure that these measures are effective. I mean, we want results. I always thought when I was here in the Parliament, and Seán, I think you would think the same, that it's not about pieces of legislation. It's about, will they achieve the results we need to achieve to help business grow and prosper, to create quality employment, and to contribute to society? And I think that's what we all need more than ever.
Yeah, and I think also the fact that we have unity now more than ever in Europe, and also we have legislation that's pointing the direction, that gives certainty to businesses, to governments. And there's a feeling out that there's no opt-out here now. There's no one going to be hiding here or getting away with it, being cute. We won't do it, but someone else will do it for us, and we'll get away with it that way. So I think that sense has created a desire, particularly among businesses and individuals indeed, to do things right, to make a contribution. And again, I suppose even you can see that in Brexit. I see almost a mind change attitude to Brexit, even since Ukraine. Before Brexit was kind of seen as the enemy, now we say, look, it's time to get over it, let's work together, see how we can manage matters and do something, as Mairead says, that will be a benefit to both the UK and the European Union, rather than looking at one another as enemies. So we have that opportunity now, but we must maintain it and we must build on it, because if we don't, then again you'd lose time, and we have no time to lose.
Yeah,
and on the issue of time, maybe some final remarks from you, Mairead.
Two quick ones. I think we have to make some tough choices, that we will need gas and nuclear in transition. I think these are difficult topics, even in this House. I think that, you know, the second point, and I think, Seán, you referred to it there, like, we don't have time to waste here. And it was interesting, I had a very good call with our US counterparts, our UK, our G7, because there's unity of purpose not just in Europe, but with all our allies. And it's interesting that now, I mean, what we thought Brexit was the worst thing that could happen, well, actually, we can deal with it. I mean, we have to deal with it. It is a reality.
Yeah.
But equally, in our discussions around what's happening in Ukraine, our UK colleagues are part of that discussion, so they have to be at the table. We just have to move tables sometimes to have the conversations. Humanity is complex, and I think never more so than now. But, you know, whatever difficulties we face, think of people in Ukraine that had a very good life and plans for their children, or had plans to get married, or just normal things, looking forward to spring, farmers wanting to go out and grow. Gone. Gone. Because one man decided that it is okay for him, because he has the artillery, to wipe them out. And you really would give credit to President Zelensky and his colleagues. I mean, honestly, how they are coping with the stress, I will never know. And the day he spoke here in Parliament, Seán, I actually found it profoundly. I mean, nobody could breathe almost when he came on screen. The worst for me was when he was leaving and the empty chair, because you had that sense, and this man doesn't know whether he will sit again or talk again.
Yeah.
Thank God he is.
Yeah.
You know.
Seán, maybe some concluding remarks from you, and I'll bring it to a close then.
Yeah, I must say I'm delighted to have had this opportunity. Thanks, Mairead, and also thanks to Minister Byrne, who was with us, and of course our good friend, President of Parliament, Roberta Metsola. I think it's always great to get together. We really have only started the conversation, because Mairead mentioned about there, which we need to have a chat about a little bit more at government level, at European level, transition.
Yeah.
We're inclined to talk about all these wonderful things that will happen, but what's going to happen in the meantime? I think there really needs to be a focus on the transition. How long is it going to last? How are we going to cope? What do we do?
Yeah.
And some people, I think, are trying to blot out that whole area, which could be detrimental to us. So we're here being practical, going back to St. Patrick. He had the shamrock, 3 persons in the old God. He used the shamrock to explain what he was doing. We need to do the same to our citizens in regarding what the transition is, how we're going to get over it, where we're going to get the energy, and we're going to keep jobs, as you said. So it's been a pleasure to be here. It's always great to be with Ibec, who do such wonderful work, and they're always promoting the positive, even in the bad days when we were really in recession. Ibec were promoting the positives, and that's what we need now more than ever. So thank you very much, Danny.
No, thank you, Seán and Mairead. It's great to actually come here and to work in that trinity of corporates, households and government working together, I think is kind of crucial. Our campaign, as I said, on sustainable substance also matched by our Stronger Europe, Stronger Ireland and now Stronger Humanity as a result of collectively getting together from this. And I think that, you know, hopefully some good will come from these dark days. Just want to thank everyone for joining us. Again, we fully appreciate taking the time to look at this webinar, and we're just going to go out on a video of our Ibec's Stronger Europe, Stronger Ireland. So again, thanks everybody.
Well done, Danny. Thank you.
No, very good. We enjoyed it.